I was raised in a big farm in Clyde, Ohio, and if you've ever been to Clyde, Ohio, if you're going down Route 20 from Fremont to Bellevue, you will see that there was a big cemetery called McPherson Cemetery on the north side of the road, and it has a big statue of General McPherson, the youngest general in the Civil War, and of course he was killed during that war. But anyway, what happened, this is some years back in Clyde, Ohio, the cemetery was vandalized. You know, it was actually, at that time, a huge amount of money, $100,000 of vandalism. And of course, the city of Clyde is rather small, and usually you can pick up who's doing what pretty easily, but nobody was coming forward after a couple of days or no information, and so the city council decided to give an $8,000 reward that would lead to the culprits of who did this awful vandalism. Well, the next day, a young man came in, and he says, I want the reward. And he said, why? And he said, well, I can tell you who did it. And they said, well, who did it? He said, well, I did it, and two other guys did it, and gave the names. He said, now, when are you going to give me my $8,000, you know? And that's not a real smart guy. I hope you don't think all the people in Clyde are like that. But you kind of use this story because in today's gospel, we have a dishonored steward, you know, and he's shrewd, you know. You know how it is. You know, you take a little there and you take a little there, and it's not very hard to do. Sometimes you see it in office, you know, somebody would take a small package of paper for their printer or take a ink cartridge, and they justify it because, well, you're going to be doing some work for the company and so forth and so on, and it happens. Well, this guy gets caught. And instead of just doing a little stealing, he starts doing a lot of stealing. You owe my master, you know, 100 bushels of core of wheat, make it 50. You owe 60 gallons of olive oil, make it 30. And Jesus commends him on his boldness. At least, you know, he's really stealing. You know, word that the children of light, he says, have that boldness and ruthlessness about following what the kingdom of God is all about. Now, a single motto demands a certain kind of ruthlessness. You know, our tendency is to fudge the motto. You know, it's like the early alphabet, you know, they had just one U. And as it went on, they needed another sound, and so they made two U's and they called it a W. And so the U is the real motto. And if you read a little bit past this gospel today, you will go to 16:16 of Luke, and in it, Jesus speaks about John the Baptizer. And he notes John's boldness. John showed Jesus, I guess, a new motto that's not based on the law, but on a person who digested the law until it came out true and real and living. And so, you know, if you're going to, in the old days, make an axe handle, you know, well, you have the motto right at hand. You know, as you're trying to make the new axe, that motto is the one that you're using. And oftentimes, the same thing could be true about yourself. You know, Jesus Christ says today, your motto is at hand. It's within you. Your best and truest self is available. But it takes some boldness to stay true to it. And your goodness must be public. Often, you know, our motto is broken by, or hidden by another motto. You know, like it's my power or my own way, and you have to be careful. You have to get back to in touch what the truth is all about. So Christ uses this example of the dishonest steward, and he says people of the world are bolder and more forthcoming than the children of light. You know, they're out there. You know, they're in your face. They make the sales. They are shrewd about money. You know, they go to eBay to get things cheaper, you know. They go to Audi because they always have everything cheaper. They buy Christmas cards, you know, the day after Christmas to make sure they don't pay too much. You know, they don't mind recycling, but they keep their cans because they can turn them in for money. And Christ points out to his disciples and said, that kind of attitude is what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for the behavior, but that kind of attitude, so the people of faith have that attitude and follow me in that side of way. You know, oftentimes, you know, I look at movies now. I'm a retired priest, and I get up usually pretty early to walk my dog, but once in a while I'll stay up late, And I don't know, a few months ago or something, I was watching what's been on the AMC channel, and there was a Paul Newman movie that I never saw before. You know, it's a young Paul Newman, and the title was Don't Give an Inch. Henry Fonda was the father, and he's the father of a logging family, and it's a logging community, and Paul Newman was his son. And they were sawing logs and everything else, and the big controversy was that the townsfolk were against him because all the other logging families, you know, were on strike. But Fonda said that they had a contract and that they couldn't go on strike until that last contract was done. Well, there's quite a bit of conflict in the movie, but in the course of the movie, as they were out felling trees, Henry Fonda, the father of the family, a tree fell on his right arm and broke it pretty badly. You know, the next scene, you know, he's in bed and he has his arm way up, and there's a big cast, and there's things coming up to hold his arm. It must have been an awful break. So he tells his wife to help him get dressed. And she gets mad at him. She yells at him and says, you know, can't you take one day off? Can't you let the boys take care of everything today? What's the matter with you? You almost died yesterday. And his reply was, there's wood to get in, and there's cats to skin. It's what I do, darling. Now help me. One may not like the person of Henry Fonda as the patriarch of that family, but his dedication to his job reflects where his heart is at. Now that's exactly what Jesus is trying to get at. You know, Christ is the model. He's dedicated. He's doing everything that the will of the Father asks him to do, and he shows it, whether it gets him in trouble or not. You know, and I think probably the most important thing probably as Christians is to get a correct view of Jesus Christ. It has to be done because sometimes Jesus gets used, and he's interpreted for one's own purpose. I remember in the 70s when there was a lot of upheaval, there was a Bible that was called the Radical Bible. You know, somebody went through the Bible and took all the statements that agreed with what they wanted to do, and they put them in this little book that they were handing out to some of the rallies. And then the front of that book, Jesus, you know, was smoking a cigarette or something else, I don't know, and he had long hair tied up in his back. And I remember the old country song, you know, that's titled Good Old Plastic Jesus on the Dashboard of My Car. You know, the song is about speeding around the country roads recklessly, but he's okay because of good old plastic Jesus on the dashboard of his car. Oftentimes, we use Christ for our own purposes, but Christ says, no, you have to kind of get the right model. And when you get that model, it's really useful, and you delved into something. You know, there's a guy still living by the name of Yves Girard. You know, he was in the news a few years back because he's the owner of Patagonia, that good clothing store. And he was in the news because he gave all his money when he dies to ecological purposes. It's where his heart is at. You know, he was a billionaire. His company actually was on the top 10 list some years back. And he's done some unusual things with that company, but he's going to give it all away. But he started off rather simply. He was a Frenchman, and he liked to climb mountains. And what they used to do in the old days to go up the mountain is use pitons. It's like a big nail, and it has a little thing where you can put your rope in, and you can kind of go up, but he didn't like it because, well, you know, the piton is hard to get out of the rock. And so you can't get it out of the rock, and so all these places are going up, somebody's done it before. And so he developed what was called a chalk. And a chalk is an asymmetrical piece of metal, and you can put some rope in there, and you can go up the mountain, and they come in different sizes. And the wonderful thing about it is you can click it up, and it can go right up with you. You don't scar the face of the mountain. And of course, that made him have an interest in, you know, things and outfits and equipment in terms of camping. Well, I think maybe that little chalk is a good way of thinking of Jesus Christ. You know, first of all, a chalk is off-centered. You know, Christ was kind of off-centered. You know, you couldn't pin him down. Even his disciples were kind of surprised. And sometimes good Christians are that way when they do things that doesn't seem to be the way society wants them to. It's asymmetrical, that at one side have different lengths of the other. And that's why it's so effective. And it's catchy, and it's true. In other words, you can go a long way up that mountain with the right equipment. So how do we get that bonus, and how do we get that resolution in our religious and spiritual life? Well, you have to hammer out a real relationship with Jesus Christ. You have to spend some time. You have to digest something. It's just not knowing the right answers to our religion questions. It has to kind of come into your heart. And then after a while, you commit yourself, not just on Christmas time, but you commit yourself to a giving and loving way of being generous, of being merciful, and being joyful. You commit yourself to the poor who are always in need. You commit yourself to being a member of a community or a family who help each other to find Christ. And of course, just like that chalk can get you up the mountain, that kind of attitude, that ruthless attitude of following one model, the real person of Christ, can get us a long way in life.